Now, I'm delighted to say Kingston Mills is with us to talk to us a little bit about what the science might be behind this and where the thought processes about spectators at sports being an issue has come from. Kingston, good morning to you. How are you?
Good morning.
We're a little bit confused by the decision-making process, and certainly the chairman of the Kerry County Board has been on with us this morning, and he says, look, if there's empirical evidence there, show it to us and tell us and bring us with you. I think that's kind of the main issue here, is that people haven't been brought with the decision-making. Why would spectators at matches be an issue?
Well, I'm confused as well, to be honest. I think the fact that 50 or more people can go to a pub down the road and the same number can't go as spectators to a rugby or football match doesn't make any sense. It's inconsistent policy, quite frankly. Outdoor activity is much safer than indoors, and I don't see that sitting at a safe distance in a stadium wearing a mask is any great risk compared with some of the other risks that are still going to be there when the current measures are in place. So I don't know where it's coming from. I don't know where the evidence is that's been spread at sporting events. They've quoted, pre and post match, either travel, or I suppose they're talking about people congregating in pubs before a match or afterwards. But again, if the pubs weren't open, that wouldn't be an issue. So it seems like sport is suffering as a result of people's desire to go to a pub. So maybe it is through travel, and if people wear masks, then the risks of transmission are significantly reduced. So I'm at a loss to understand why these measures have been implemented for sporting events.
Okay, that's very interesting to hear, because the point you made about masks, public transport is now something that people are being recommended against using as well. You can't help shake the feeling that the people who are making the decisions don't really use public transport and don't need it in their day-to-day lives. But a lot of people actually do desperately need public transport, and now they're being warned against it as a measure of public health.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, if you see the scenes of very packed buses or trains, like we saw from London earlier in the pandemic, that would be worrying. Certainly, even wearing masks in a very crowded setup is not ideal. So I do agree that crowded buses or Lewis's or other modes of transport are not ideal. But I'd imagine most people going certainly to rural GA matches won't be going by public transport. They'll be going in their private cars, or if people are in the city, they can cycle their bike to watch a sporting event. So I don't see that the public transport issue is part of the problem in terms of getting to sporting events. And if people wear masks, that's significantly reduced. I mean, again, all the evidence. I mean, the government were slow enough to buy into this, but they have bought into it now. And a lot of us scientists have been saying it for some time, that there's a significant benefit in wearing a mask. It's not 100%, but it's certainly, there's evidence that wearing a mask does stop transmission. So people either in transport or in a football stadium, if they're wearing a mask, or if they're at work and they're close proximity to someone else, wearing a mask is certainly beneficial in terms of reducing transmission.
When you think about this, there's been a significant balls up here, really. Like, sport should actually be one of the easiest ways to communicate to people about best practice. People go to games, they learn the protocols, they learn that it's going to take you an extra 15, 20 minutes to get in because you're going to have to queue for a little while for entrance and for exits. Let's all introduce a slightly different pace to our lives to try and see what the new normal, which was supposed to be, here in summertime, was going to be the case. But instead, what we've done is we've shut down the opportunity to access that as a means of communication. These games are all on TV. Every week, people are watching League of Ireland matches, GAA matches, and now next week they're going to be watching rugby matches. And if there was 100% compliance with the crowds wearing masks and slowly queuing to get in and slowly queuing to get out and everybody obeying the rules, wouldn't that have been a brilliant piece of architecture to explain to the public, this is how we're going to do things from now on, you better get used to it, but actually it works fine?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to say that, I'm not trivializing the risks, and I've made lots of comments about, the need to practice safe, for people to be, doing the right things in terms of social isolating and wearing masks and not congregating. So I don't want to come across as being, giving mixed messages here. So I don't think large crowds at any matches are desirable at the moment. I do think that smaller crowds are not an issue, and I think a couple of hundred starting with, and showing that you can effectively get a few hundred people into a large stadium effectively by doing the measures that of distancing at entrances and exits, at closing all bars and coffee outlets, and just not allowing people to go to the toilet during the matches, and if they need to go to the toilet, they go to the toilet and they go home. But there are simple measures that could be put in place to make it a safe thing. And I think if they did that and showed that there wasn't an issue with transmission at matches with smaller numbers, to start with a few hundred, then they can make the case for increasing that over time as hopefully the pandemic reduces again. I mean, what's happening at the moment is certainly very worrying. The numbers increasing nationally, and a lot of this seems to be around clusters in certain workplaces, but these are all indoor workplaces where people are working in very close proximity to each other, and others are then community transmission. We hear a lot of cases about house parties and maybe pubs, we don't know, as sources of transmission. Certainly when people are in close proximity, that's an issue. It's not the same in outdoor activity, where the transmission is much more difficult for the virus to transmit outdoors compared with indoors. So I think that sport could be actually an example of where good behaviour, and the sporting people themselves, I think, are by and large very bought into all the regulations and doing all the right things to make sure there isn't transmission. So I think sport can help for the rest of the population to see how it should be done and can be done.
Instead, we've decided to take that opportunity and say, no, we're going to prevent anybody from accessing these events, and we're going to, I mean, it seems as if the directives are you can't drop your kid off and watch the game. Again, Tim Murphy was making the point earlier that we're going to have parents drop their kids to under 14 and under 16 matches and then go out to their cars, and all the cars are going to be parked essentially beside each other. Do we really think all those parents are going to sit in their car for the duration of the game, or are they going to get out and have a chat, which actually ends up making them congregate in a smaller space?
Yeah, I mean that's an anomaly completely, and I mean I really do feel sorry for the rural sporting community that where the parents in particular can't sit in a large stadium and watch their kids playing football. So that is certainly they've got caught in the trap of this blanket policy on no spectators at all, and it is very tough on them. I mean, sport is such a part of all rural life and city life for so many people. I think it's important that we do try and facilitate it in a safe way. And I mean, I'm not advocating that we go crazy on this.
But none of us are. It's the opposite of that. It's like let's learn the lessons from having the 200 people at the events over the last couple of weeks. I think, sorry, you've hit on the key point there that I meant to bring up from the very start. It's the blunt instrument approach to everything, which is particularly galling if you're in one of the 3 counties who are in lockdown, because it shows that apparently we can have very specific and localised, notions of and a response to this, except when it comes to something like sport, where it's, no, sorry, something has happened, somebody has ruined it for everybody, and as a result, all sport must now go behind closed doors.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult for the policymakers to come up with something that's going to satisfy everybody, and there's always going to be issues around one group or another not being satisfied what measures are brought in. So it is. I do feel sorry for the authorities and for the medical health advisors, in trying to come up with policies that suit all. But I really do think this is a situation where the sport has certainly missed out on what is what are measures that are really should be designed to control the infection in other areas, in particular in work areas, where it's been a big issue with people, working in very close proximity to each other indoors and perhaps not wearing masks. So I think the whole policy, it needs to be looked at. We have the same thing with airline flights. We still have flights coming in with people, a couple of hundred people sitting in a plane for an hour or two before they get to Ireland, being asked to isolate when they arrive, and it's not mandatory. And we're not being told lately the numbers of cases that are coming from travel, but that had been going up, and it will go up again if we don't put in place the measures to contain travel, international travel. So that's international travel is much riskier than travel to a football match, and yet that's been singled out. And yet the international travel is okay. People have been advised by government not to do it, but it's not been made mandatory to self-isolate. It's not been made mandatory to have a test before you travel or when you arrive, and it should be.
Kingston, would you have had faith in the idea of the government actually just promoting people who are travelling around the country to take separate modes of transport, and failing that, wearing masks within a car as you're travelling? Would you have had faith in that policy? And if so, why wasn't that the one-size-fits-all approach that could have covered sport as well? Because that is essentially the thing that is precluding people from attending games now.
Yeah, it's the same. What's the difference in terms of the risks of driving to a sporting event or driving to work? It's the same risk. So, people are driving to work in a car with someone who's not a family member. They've been asked to wear a mask, and I think that's reasonably sensible. I think that the same measure could be said of people driving to a sporting event. If you're not from the same family, well, then you wear masks. I think some of the sporting organisations, like the rugby in particular, are testing all their players and all their staff, and I think there's been one case only in a player, or it wasn't even a player, it was one of the academy, but it wasn't the frontline player, academy player being positive, and then that action was taken. But by and large, the sporting organisations have done a very good job in putting in place measures and following government guidelines. So I think it's tough on them is the bottom line.
Okay, so the current policy doesn't seem to make that much sense. What's the way out of this for us, Kingston, in terms of what should be done and what could happen next?
Well, look, I don't want to advise, that we have, 20,000 people in Croke Park next week. That's certainly not going to happen. But I think if we have 200 in a small stadium, it's not a huge risk. And if you can demonstrate that there is no risk or there's no spread associated with 200, then you can go up to 500 and a couple of thousand. So I think, it's stepwise measures where it's demonstrated that the people who are, in charge of stadia can put in place the measures to ensure safe arrival, seating and departure from stadium without risk, and wearing masks. Everybody or a visor. I think that the sporting organisations could simply hand out masks at gates if people didn't have them, and they're inexpensive now. You can buy them for 20 cents, and so there's no reason why everybody can't have a mask and wear it at a sporting event, spectators. So I think that's something that certainly would be a simple policy to start with. But it has to be a stepwise process. I know we've gone backwards from where we were, but hopefully we can go forwards in the next few weeks.